Good morning. Tony Appleberg Parks here. Welcome back to the channel, Help for Docs. I am your CDI and risk adjustment specialist and educator. And today we're going to talk about something that just became very real for outpatient coding and CDI teams. So I like to call it the Great Code Disappearing Act. And it's about surviving the V28 transition in 2026. So if you code for Medicare Advantage patients or use support providers who do, this is the video you need to watch right now, not next quarter, because the changes we're covering today are already affecting reimbursement 100%. All right, before we get into it, just the quick disclaimer. Everything in the presentation is for informational and educational purposes, not legal advice, and it's not a substitute for your own organization's official coding or compliance guidance. Coding rules and payment models change, sometimes very quickly, so please verify anything that you hear today against your current official guidance from CMS, HEMA, AAPC, ACDIS, all those entities before you apply it to any specific case. All right, so that out of the way, let's look at the big picture. For the last 3 payment years, Medicare Advantage risk adjustment ran on a blend, which gradually increased towards 100% V28. So part of the calculation used the old CMS-HCC model, which was version 24, and part of it used the new one, version 28. And that blend gave organizations a cushion during the transition. This was over 3 years. So even if your documentation habits hadn't fully caught up to V28, most of your score was still protected by the old model. Well, guess what? Now that cushion is officially gone. So as of payment year 2026, the CMS-HCC Model V28 is the only model running. 100% of Medicare Advantage risk scores are now calculated under V28 rules. Look at how the phase-in worked. Okay, so in payment year 2024, it was 67% V24 and 33% V28. So they gave us mostly the old model. Then in 2025, they flipped it, and that was 33% V24 and 67% V28. Kind of warming you up to it, right? And now in 2026, guess what? It's 100% V28. So if your organization used those 2 transition years to update your coding habits and documentation workflows, you should be in pretty good shape. But if you didn't, the full impact is landing all at once this year. I hope that's not you. So what actually changed under V28? Let's look at the numbers, because frankly, they can tell the story better than I can. Under the old V24 model, about 9,797 ICD-10 CM diagnosis codes mapped to an HCC. Under V28, that number drops to about 7,770. CMS removed 2,294 codes from the crosswalk and added 268 new ones, for a net loss of more than 2,000 codes that used to carry a weight, and now they don't. At the same time, the number of HCC categories actually expanded. There used to be 86 under V24, and now there's 115 under V28. So you have more categories, but fewer codes that map into them. And this combination is exactly why CMS projected an average national drop of about 3.12% in Medicare Advantage risk scores. That is astronomical. fewer codes counting, more precision required, and a lower average score across the board is happening unless documentation keeps up. So I want to talk about how it gets very practical in our day-to-day coding. In V28, unspecified often means unrecognized, unfortunately. So let's look at a few real examples. Take malnutrition, the malnutrition family. Codes like E43, E44.0, E44.1, and R64. Under the V24 model, those map to HCC 21, and they had a coefficient of 0.455. Now under V28, that entire family maps to nothing. It simply doesn't risk adjust anymore. And it's the same story with certain unspecified vascular codes, like I-73.9 and I-20.9. These ones killed me. These were ones I always, made sure to capture, and no more. These dropped out of the crosswalk completely. And while more specific sibling codes like I-20.0 do still carry a weight. So the lesson here isn't that the diagnosis doesn't matter, it's that the level of specificity in the documentation now determines whether it counts at all. And diabetes is a whole other mention because it didn't disappear, but it got constrained. Under V24, a patient with diabetes and complications could stack the coefficients up to around 0.59. Under V28, CMS uses what's called constraining logic, which pulls related diabetes HCCs down to a single shared coefficient. So it's close to 0.166. So the diagnosis still counts, it just doesn't stack the way coders are used to it stacking. Now, why should we care about this, or why does it matter beyond the spreadsheet? And I'll give you two reasons, and they're connected. The first one, the biggie, is RADV audits have been ramped up back up to a full scale in the very same year that V28 reached full implementation. I mean, they're hitting us hard this year, folks. That's not a coincidence. Organizations still coding on V24 habits are the most likely to submit diagnoses that will no longer generate a score, or even worse, diagnoses that draw a second look from an auditor. And there are so many more auditors than there was before. The second thing is the government itself is watching this transition closely. The HHS Office of Inspector General opened a formal review in January of 2026, specifically comparing coding trends under V24 and V28 to determine whether CMS actually achieved the savings it projected. I mean, yeah, they hit us hard. They wanted to save some money. Now they're checking their results. So this shift was designed with intention. So when the regulator is actively studying the transition you're living through, you can take that as a strong signal that your documentation defensibility needs to be front and center this year, not just an afterthought. So what should outpatient CDI and coding teams actually do with all of this information? I'd point you towards making 4 concrete moves. First, rebuild your recapture and suspect list against the V28 crosswalk. A list that's built on V24 logic is chasing codes that don't pay anymore, and that wastes provider time and coder time alike, especially when you're digging in, you're pulling reporting and things. You want to make sure that you're pulling out those codes that no longer carry a weight, so that you're doing your gap reports, your drop codes reports based on things that are going to matter. Second, retire the reflex of defaulting to an unspecified code. Okay, this just can't happen anymore. If the chart supports a more specific diagnosis, that specific code is the one that risk adjusts, and increasingly, it's the only one that does. Train your providers and insist that your providers document for specificity. Third, redirect your audit focus. The diagnosis is worth a second look because of the shift under V28. So heart failure detail and severity documentation now carry more relative weight than some of the diagnoses that coders used to spend the most time debating. And I'm going to give you a fourth one. Query for clinical evidence, not for score. Okay, that's super important for compliance. As financial pressure increases the temptation to push towards higher severity coding, audit scrutiny is increasing right alongside it. And their litmus test on this is, does it look like this was an attempt to increase the payment, or is there support here that for the code that was actually documented? So every diagnosis you capture needs to stand on its own clinically. Then it has to be supported by meet criteria. If you don't understand meet criteria, please refer to my video on that, but I'll tell you the acronym is monitor, evaluate, assess, treat. So it has to stand on its own clinically, be supported by meet criteria, and documented because it's true, not because it's favorable in terms of reimbursement. Okay, so let's put all of this together. V28 is no longer a future concern. It's already here. It's fully here. And as of payment year 2026, it governs 100% of Medicare Advantage risk scores. Fewer diagnosis codes carry HCC weights now, and that's down from about 9,797 to 7,770. Even though the model expanded to 115 HCC categories from only 86. Unspecified codes are the most common place where value quietly disappears, which means specificity in documentation isn't just a nice to have anymore. This is the difference between a diagnosis that pays you anything at all and one that doesn't. And with RADV audits active and OIG reviewing the transition in real time, every diagnosis your team captures needs to be defensible on clinical grounds first. So if you get that right, the reimbursement accuracy will follow. Okay, I want you to know that every fact in this presentation was cross-checked against the sources I'm giving here on this slide before we put it in front of you, and this includes CMS's own rate announcements and model documentation, the OIG active work plan, and then further guidance from AAPC, AHIMA, and ACTIS. So I'd encourage you to bookmark these and check them directly whenever you're making documentation or coding decisions for your patients. And there you have it. That's the Great Code Disappearing Act for you. What V28 actually changed, where the value is vanishing, and what your team can and has to do about it starting today if you want to survive. So keep in mind, if your organization needs any help with outpatient CDI, risk adjustment, auditing, provider education, head on over to Help for Docs and see how we can help you. But if this video helped you at all to help make V28 make more sense, please do me a favor and subscribe so I can keep bringing you the latest topics of discussion and regulatory updates and coding changes and documentation changes and all those things that come along with this world that are so hard to keep track of. I can help keep you up to date on those. I just need you to subscribe. And if the content's value, boy, I'm unable to speak at the moment. If the content is valuable to you, please also give me a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate it. It just helps the channel reach more coders and CDI professionals who hopefully can gain some value from it. So thanks so much for watching and for spending your valuable time with me, and I'll see you in the next one.